Imagine a dent in metal, barely visible, no bigger than your thumb, that stood between a king and death. A single crack that, if left unrepaired, would have erased an entire dynasty from history. But the world of ancient armor holds far more than gleaming breastplates and ceremonial helmets. Behind every suit of metal that survived battle after battle lies a network of battlefield blacksmiths, desperate soldiers, and emergency repairs that changed the course of wars. We're not talking about pristine armor fresh from the forge. We're talking about split chainmail held together with wire scavenged from a corpse, helmets hammered back into shape while arrows still flew overhead, and leather straps stitched with intestine because there was nothing else available. These repairs weren't pretty. They were brutal, improvised, and performed under the worst possible conditions. Yet archaeological evidence shows us armor pieces that were mended dozens of times, each repair a testament to a warrior who refused to die. From a Byzantine general whose repaired cuirass saved him 7 times in a single campaign, to a samurai whose emergency helmet repair became a symbol of honor, these are repairs that echo through history. Today, we'll uncover 10 of the most desperate, ingenious, and life-saving armor repairs ever documented, each one more remarkable than the last. And the first one, it involves a repair made with a dead man's bones. 1. The Agincourt breastplate, a prayer hammered into steel. October 25, 1415. Agincourt, France. Sir John Cornwall stands in mud so deep it threatens to swallow his sabatons whole. Around him, thousands of English longbowmen prepare for what everyone knows will be a slaughter, just not the kind they hope for. The French outnumber them 5-1. Maybe more. But Cornwall's not thinking about the French cavalry bearing down on him. He's thinking about the fist-sized dent in his breastplate, the one he got 3 days ago in a skirmish outside Harfleur. The armor smith who traveled with their army died of dysentery 2 weeks back. No one's coming to fix it. Here's what makes this moment fascinating. That dent isn't just an inconvenience. Medieval breastplates worked through something called glancing geometry. The curved surface was designed to deflect sword strikes and lance points away from the body. But a dent? That creates a catch point, a place where a blade can dig in instead of sliding off. That single depression in the steel is basically a target saying, "Stab here." Cornwall knows this. Every knight knows this. So the night before Agincourt, he does something that sounds insane but makes perfect sense when you're about to die. He finds the body of a French soldier killed in a scouting raid. The man's breastplate is intact, and Cornwall strips it, takes it to the camp's remaining farrier, and demands an emergency repair. But here's where it gets interesting. They can't just hammer out the dent. The metal's been weakened by the initial impact. Straightening it would create microfractures that would shatter under the next hit. So the farrier does something brilliant. He cuts a section from the French breastplate and welds it over Cornwall's dent, creating a double-layered patch. The weld is crude. He uses a portable forge, basically a ceramic bowl filled with charcoal, and bellows pumped by a terrified page boy. The temperature isn't hot enough for a proper forge weld, so he has to work the metal at a lower heat, knowing it won't bond perfectly. He secures it with 4 rivets scavenged from a supply wagon wheel. It takes 6 hours. The battle starts at dawn. Now here's the payoff. During the battle, Cornwall takes 3 direct hits to the chest. One from a poleaxe that would have caved in his original breastplate. The patched section holds. The double layer absorbs the impact. He survives. But what happens next is what makes this repair legendary. The French knight who struck that blow, his weapon gets caught in one of the rivet heads. Just for a second. Just long enough for Cornwall to drive his rondel dagger up through the gap in the French knight's helmet. That catch point, the imperfection in the repair, becomes the thing that saves Cornwall's life a second time. Archaeologists found what they believe is Cornwall's breastplate in 1818, stored in a private collection. The patch is still there. And here's the eerie part. Scratched into the inside of the patch, in crude letters, is a Latin prayer. Sancta Maria, ora pro nobis. Holy Mary, pray for us. The farrier carved it into the French steel before welding it to Cornwall's armor. A prayer hammered into a dead man's breastplate, worn by an Englishman, in a battle that shouldn't have been won. But that's not even the most desperate repair we'll cover. 2. The samurai's shame. when honor demanded a visible scar. 1584, Komaki Nagakute Campaign, Japan. Honda Tadakatsu is staring at his his chest armor, and seeing his reputation crack along with it. The split runs vertically down the center plate, right through the lacquered leather scales. It happened during a spear exchange with an Oda warrior, and now everyone in his unit has seen it. Here's what you need to understand about samurai armor. It wasn't just protection. It was identity. The specific color of your lacing, the family crest on your helmet, the style of your shoulder guards. These things announced who you were before you even drew your sword. And damaged armor? That was a story. It told everyone watching that you'd been in combat close enough for someone to mark you. But here's the tension. Tadakatsu's armor is famous. He wears black lacquered armor with devil horns on his helmet. Intimidating, distinctive. His reputation is built on being untouchable in battle. He's served Tokugawa Ieyasu for years without a single injury. And now this split down his chest armor threatens that image. He could have it repaired invisibly. Any competent armorsmith could relace the scales, replace the damaged sections, make it look like new. That's the practical choice. But Tadakatsu makes a different decision. One that seems counterintuitive until you understand samurai psychology. He orders the repair to be visible. Deliberately, obviously visible. The armorer, a man named Ryakan, uses contrasting red silk lacing to resecure the split scales. Against the black lacquer, it stands out like a wound. Then he does something remarkable. He reinforces the crack from the inside with a thin iron plate, but leaves the exterior split visible, just bound together with that red cord. Why would a warrior want his damage to show? Because in samurai culture, there's a concept called Kizueito, the honor of scars. A repaired wound on your armor isn't shame. It's proof. It says, I was there. I fought close enough to be hit. And I'm still here. Tadakatsu wears this armor in the Battle of Nagakute 3 days later. And something psychological happens. When enemy soldiers see that red split down his chest armor, they don't see weakness. They see a warrior who's already survived being struck. It's intimidating in a way pristine armor isn't. Here's the wild part. The repair holds through the entire campaign. But more than that, it starts a trend. Other samurai in Tadakatsu's unit begin requesting visible repairs on their armor. Not fake ones, that would be dishonorable. But when their armor gets damaged, they have it repaired with contrasting colors. It becomes a badge of experience. Fast forward to 1600, the Battle of Sekigahara, the battle that will unify Japan. Tadakatsu is there, still wearing the same armor with that red split down the center. 16 years later, and has never had it made invisible. And during that battle, he takes another hit. This time a musket ball that strikes him dead center, right where the old repair sits. The layered construction from Ryakan's repair, that interior iron plate, deflects the ball. It doesn't penetrate. Tadakatsu walks away from Sekigahara, and Japan's history shifts because a repair was stronger than the original. But wait, here's the detail that makes this repair truly remarkable. After Tadakatsu's death in 1610, his armor is passed to his son. And the son adds his own repairs, also in red, when the armor gets damaged in later campaigns. Then the grandson adds his repairs. For 3 generations, this armor accumulates visible scars, each repair in the same red silk, each one documenting a moment when the wearer nearly died but didn't. The armor still exists today in the Tokugawa Art Museum. It looks like a map of survival, black lacquer crisscrossed with red. And historians can trace each repair to a specific battle, a specific wound, a specific moment when a warrior's life hung on the strength of silk cord and iron plate. Speaking of repairs that lasted generations, the next one involves armor that was repaired so many times. Historians can't tell which metal is original. 3. The Frankish King's Mail. 47 repairs in 30 years. 8th century Francia. Somewhere in modern-day Belgium. We're looking at a fragment of chainmail that tells a story more clearly than any chronicle. It's in the Musée de l'Armée in Paris now, catalogue number E.2437. But for 30 years it was wrapped around the torso of a Frankish warrior whose name we'll never know. Here's what makes this piece of mail extraordinary. it's been repaired 47 times. We know this because a metallurgist named Dr. Laurent Morel spent 2 years analyzing it with electron microscopy, counting every patch, every replacement ring, every improvised fix. What he found rewrites our understanding of how warriors actually maintained their armor. Chainmail works through a simple principle. Interlocking rings distribute the force of a blow across a wide area. One ring breaks, the system still functions. But lose too many rings in one spot, and you've got a gap, a window for a blade to slip through and find flesh. This particular fragment, it's roughly the size of a dinner plate, probably from the chest area, started life as standard Frankish mail. Rings about 8 millimeters in diameter, each one riveted closed. Good quality for the time. Not the finest Roman mail, but solid battlefield equipment. The first repair is neat, professional. 6 rings replaced in a small cluster. The replacement rings match the originals perfectly. Same diameter, same wire thickness, same rivet style. This was done by someone who knew what they were doing. Probably the original armor who made the piece. But repair number 7? That's where things get interesting. The replacement rings are slightly larger. Different metal. You can see it in the oxidation pattern. The rivets are cruder. And here's what this tells us. The warrior couldn't get back to his original armor. Maybe the man died. Maybe the warrior moved to a different region. Maybe there was a campaign happening and no time for a trip to the forge. So he found someone else. Someone who didn't have the exact right materials but made it work anyway. By repair 15, we're seeing rings from at least 4 different sources. The metallurgy shows varying iron content, different production methods. One cluster uses bronze rings, softer than iron, not ideal, but they'll stop a slash. Another section has rings that are slightly oval instead of circular, probably salvaged from a different piece of mail and hammered to fit. But here's where it gets really fascinating. Repair 23 is made with rings that Dr. Morel identifies as Roman in origin. Not reproduction, actual Roman rings, probably 400 years old by the time they were used in this repair. Think about what that means. This warrior, or his armor, had access to salvaged Roman mail. Maybe from a battlefield where Roman garrison armor was left behind. Maybe from a trading post. Maybe stripped from a corpse no one wanted to talk about. And whoever did this repair valued function over everything else. If Roman rings fit and worked, use them. By repair 31, the pattern changes. A large section, maybe 20 rings, gets replaced all at once. And these rings are high quality, matching the original style. Dr. Morel's theory: the warrior came into money. Won a battle, got a reward from his lord, finally had enough to pay for a proper repair. But then repairs 32 through 47 go back to the improvised style. Mismatched rings, different metals, crude rivets. The money didn't last, or the warrior couldn't afford to be without the mail long enough for a quality repair. Now here's the crucial detail that makes this mail fragment a survival story. None of the repairs failed. Every patch, every improvised fix, every weird mixture of bronze and iron and ancient Roman rings, they all held. We know this because the damage patterns around each repair show continued use. This mail saw more battles after being fixed. But before moving on, I would like to ask you for something. If you like these documentaries and want to support me, please consider subscribing. It's free. The final repair, number 47, is the most telling. It's in the lower section of the fragment, and it's massive, almost 60 rings replaced. The rings are good quality, matching the original, but they're installed with incredible care, perfect alignment, professional riveting. Dr. Morel's conclusion: this was likely a funeral repair. The warrior died, maybe in old age, maybe in battle, and someone who cared about him had the mail properly restored one last time before it was buried or passed on. It's a goodbye written in iron. But here's the twist that makes this fragment precious to historians. It was never buried. The high-quality final repair suggests it was meant to be, but instead it ended up in circulation. Someone inherited it, used it, and eventually, centuries later, it ended up in a museum where we could study every repair, every improvised fix, every moment when a warrior's life depended on rings that didn't quite match. 30 years of battlefield survival, written in 47 repairs. And speaking of survival against impossible odds, the next repair involves a helmet that was split completely in half. 4. The split helmet of Crécy, welded with a sword. August 26, 1346. Crécy, France. Philip de Montfort has a problem that would make most men give up and run. His bassinet, his close-fitting helmet, has been split from crown to rim by a poleaxe. Not dented. Not cracked. Split. Like someone took a can opener to it. The two halves are still roughly in shape, but there's a gap you could slide your fingers through running from top to bottom. He's on a battlefield that's actively trying to kill him. English longbowmen are shredding the French cavalry with a rate of fire that seems impossible. And his head protection is now 2 pieces of metal that used to be 1 piece. Here's what makes this moment historically significant. Philip doesn't retreat. Instead, he does something so desperate, so improvised, that when we found the helmet in 1878, archaeologists initially thought it was a forgery because the repair seemed too crude to be real. He finds his squire, a teenager named Arnaud who's terrified enough to piss himself but loyal enough to stay. Together, they retreat maybe 50 yards from the main fighting, not to safety, that doesn't exist here, but to a small depression in the ground where they're marginally less likely to get shot. And they perform battlefield surgery on a helmet. First problem, you can't weld metal without serious heat. The kind of heat you get from a forge, not a battlefield. But Philip isn't trying to weld it. Not initially. He's trying to make it wearable enough to get through the next hour. Arnaud has a sword, Philip's spare weapon. It's a standard knightly sword, nothing fancy, but it has a crossguard. And here's where desperate ingenuity comes in. They break the sword. Just snap the blade off about 6 inches from the hilt. Then they use that crossguard as a clamp. They align the 2 halves of the helmet as best they can. It's not perfect, there's still a visible seam, and they force the broken sword's crossguard over the split from the inside of the helmet. The crossguard bridges the gap. Then they use leather straps, cut from Arnaud's belt, to bind it in place. They're literally tying a broken helmet together with a broken sword and pieces of clothing. This takes maybe 10 minutes. Arrows are still landing around them. One hits Arnaud in the thigh. He'll survive it, but barely. Philip gets the helmet back on his head. It's uncomfortable. It shifts when he moves. The gap isn't completely closed, but it's protection. Sort of. Now here's where it gets interesting. Philip survives Crécy. Against overwhelming odds, in a battle where French nobility is being slaughtered, he makes it out. And instead of discarding the butchered helmet, he keeps it. 2 months later, he's back in his estate in Burgundy. And he has the helmet properly repaired, but he doesn't erase the battlefield fix. He has an armor forge weld the split, using proper heat and technique, fusing the 2 halves back into 1 piece. But that broken sword crossguard? It stays. The armor carefully works around it, incorporating it into the repair. And then he does something remarkable. He engraves text around the split. In Latin, bifurcatus sed non fractus. Split but not broken. The helmet becomes a family heirloom. Not because it's beautiful, the repair is visible, the weld line obvious, the whole thing slightly asymmetrical now. But because it represents something, survival through improvisation. Fast forward to 1415, Agincourt. Philip's grandson wears this helmet into battle. The same helmet, still showing its crude battlefield repair, still with that broken sword crossguard inside. And during the battle, the grandson takes a mace blow to the head, right on the repair line. The helmet holds. The weld doesn't split. The grandson survives. Here's what archaeologists discovered when they finally studied the helmet properly. The battlefield repair, that broken sword crossguard and leather binding, actually saved the helmet from becoming completely useless. Without that temporary fix holding the halves in rough alignment, trying to forge weld them later would have been nearly impossible. The metal would have warped, the curvature would have been wrong. In other words, that desperate 10-minute repair under arrow fire wasn't just a stopgap. It was the foundation that allowed the proper repair to work at all. But here's the detail that makes this helmet special. The leather straps are still there. Inside the helmet, underneath the forge weld, preserved by the heat of the welding process. Arnor's belt, cut into strips, carbonized but intact. When researchers opened up the helmet for conservation, they found them. Thin black strips of leather that shouldn't exist but do. Someone nearly 700 years ago, bleeding from an arrow wound, cut his belt apart to save his lord's life. And that belt is still there, sealed inside the metal. The helmet is in the Musée de l'Armée in Paris now. They keep it in climate-controlled storage, only bringing it out for special research. But every few years, they allow school groups to see it. And they tell those children the same thing. Sometimes survival isn't about having the best equipment. It's about refusing to quit when your equipment fails. Speaking of equipment failure, the next repair involves armor that was literally exploding. 5. The gunpowder trauma. Ottoman plate armor welded with gold. 1453. Siege of Constantinople. Mehmet II has a problem that's killing his best soldiers. The Byzantines are using Greek fire and early firearms, and his warriors' armor is failing in ways they've never seen. Traditional repairs don't work when the metal itself has been traumatized by explosive force. Here's what's happening. When an early firearm, we're talking about primitive hand cannons that are barely controlled explosions, hits plate armor, it doesn't just dent the metal. It changes the metal's structure. The extreme heat creates stress fractures that spider out from the impact point. The metal becomes brittle, and traditional hammering to fix the dent can cause the entire section to shatter like glass. One of Mehmet's commanders, a man named Balteoglu, learns this the hard way. His cuirass takes a glancing hit from a Byzantine hand cannon. The ball doesn't penetrate, but it leaves a crater in the breastplate. Balteoglu thinks he's lucky, the armor held. He has it hammered back into shape by a regular armor. 3 days later, during another assault, he takes a sword strike to the chest. The repaired section of his cuirass shatters. The blade gets through. Balteoglu survives, but barely. This is when Mehmet brings in someone extraordinary, a Jewish metalworker named Isaac Harkonnen, whose family has been working with gold and silver for generations. Isaac understands something the military armors don't: metal memory. Here's the concept. When metal is stressed by extreme heat, its crystalline structure changes. The grains of iron shift, creating weak points. You can't just hammer it back. You need to anneal it, heal it. And that requires controlled heating and cooling. But there's a problem. Annealing armor takes time. You need to heat it slowly, hold it at temperature, cool it gradually. Balteoglu and hundreds of other warriors need their armor back now. The siege is ongoing. They're fighting every day. Isaac comes up with a solution that seems insane. He'll repair the armor with gold. Here's why this works. Gold has a lower melting point than iron. Isaac can create a gold alloy that will flow into the stress fractures in the damaged armor without heating the iron hot enough to damage it further. The gold will fill the microcracks, reinforcing the damaged structure. But it's not pure gold. That would be too soft. Isaac creates an alloy using gold, silver, and copper. The mixture has strength and a melting point around 900 degrees Celsius, hot enough to flow, low enough not to annihilate the iron structure. The process is delicate. Isaac drills tiny holes around the damaged area, relief points that prevent the stress from spreading. Then he packs the crater with his gold alloy powder mixed with a flux made from borax. He heats it with a small, precise torch, nothing like a blacksmith's forge, more like a jeweler's tool. The gold alloy melts, flows into the stress fractures, bonds with the iron. When it cools, the repair is visible. A gold starburst in the center of the breastplate. But the armor is stronger than before. The gold has reinforced the damaged section like surgical pins in a broken bone. Balteoglu wears this armor for the rest of the siege. He takes 3 more hits to the chest. The gold repair holds every time. More than holds, it distributes the impact force across a wider area. It's actually better than the original armor. Word spreads. Other commanders want the gold repair. Isaac and his small team of craftsmen become the most valuable non-combatants in Mehmet's army. They work 18-hour days, repairing armor that's been traumatized by gunpowder weapons. Here's what makes this repair method revolutionary. It's the first documented use of a lower melting point metal to repair battlefield armor damaged by gunpowder. Isaac is essentially inventing a technique that won't be widely understood until the 19th century, using metallurgical science to solve a military problem. But there's a cost. Gold is expensive. Mehmet is spending a fortune on these repairs. Some of his advisors argue it's wasteful. Just give the warriors new armor. But Mehmet understands something crucial. These men are veterans. They're alive because they know how to fight in their specific armor. Giving them new equipment means they have to relearn how it moves, how it restricts, how it protects. That relearning period gets men killed. So he keeps paying for gold repairs. By the time Constantinople falls on May 29, 1453, Isaac and his team have repaired more than 300 pieces of armor. The total cost in gold is staggering. Some historians estimate it would be worth over $2 million today. But here's the payoff. Casualty rates among warriors with gold-repaired armor are 40% lower than those with standard repairs or new armor. That's not a small difference. That's the difference between winning and losing key assaults. After the siege, Isaac is granted a position in Mehmet's court. He's no longer just a metalworker, he's an armor. And he trains others in his technique. For the next 50 years, Ottoman armor features these characteristic gold repairs. Starbests of precious metal marking where gunpowder tried and failed to kill. Museums today have several examples of Ottoman armor from this period with Isaac's signature gold repairs. The Topkapi Palace Museum has 3 pieces, and they've been studied extensively. The metallurgy is sophisticated, centuries ahead of its time. The gold alloy Isaac developed has a higher copper content than standard gold jewelry of the period, giving it strength while maintaining workability. But here's the tragic footnote. As firearms improved, even Isaac's repairs couldn't keep up. By 1500, hand cannons were powerful enough that the impact trauma shattered armor beyond any repair. The age of plate armor was ending, killed by chemistry and physics. Still, for 50 years, gold saved lives. And somewhere in that overlap between medieval warfare and modern technology, a Jewish metalworker figured out how to heal metal the same way a doctor heals bone. Speaking of healing the seemingly impossible, the next repair involves chainmail that was repaired underwater. 6. The Vikings' desperate hour. Mail sewn with fishing line. Late 9th century. Somewhere off the coast of England. Halfdan Ragnarsson is drowning in his armor, and that's exactly what saves his life. Here's the setup. Viking raiders are fleeing a failed assault on a coastal monastery. The Saxons responded faster than expected, and now Halfdan's crew is fighting a retreat to their ships. During the chaos, Halfdan gets pushed off a dock. He's wearing a brinja, a knee-length chainmail shirt that weighs about 30 pounds. In water, it weighs more, much more. It's dragging him down. But here's where the story gets interesting. Halfdan doesn't ditch the mail. That armor is worth more than most people earn in a lifetime. It's his inheritance, his protection, his status symbol. So he does something that sounds impossible. He fights his way to the surface, gets grabbed by his crew, hauled into the longship. And that's when he sees the damage. A Saxon spear caught him during the fight before he went in the water. Tore a gash in the mail about 6 inches long, maybe 40 rings gone. In normal circumstances, that's an annoying repair but not urgent. But Halfdan's problem is specific. They're 3 days from the nearest friendly port, and they're being pursued. If they get caught, he'll have to fight with compromised armor. That 6-inch gap is right over his ribs. One thrust from a spear or seeks, and he's dead. But they can't stop to do a proper repair. They need to keep rowing, keep moving, stay ahead of the Saxon ships they can see on the horizon. So Halfdan does something that shows the difference between surviving and dying. He repairs his mail while the ship is moving. He doesn't have replacement rings. They're not carrying spare mail on a raid. He doesn't have proper tools. The ship's few implements are for sailing and fighting, not metalwork. What he does have is this: fishing line. Lots of fishing line. The ship's supplies include hundreds of feet of twisted sinew cord used for fishing and mending nets. And Halfdan starts sewing his chainmail back together with it. Here's how this works. Chainmail rings need to interlock to function. You can't just tie them. They have to pass through each other. But Halfdan can't make new rings without a forge. So he improvises a different structure. He takes the damaged edges of the mail, the rings that are still intact but exposed, and he starts weaving fishing line through them in a tight pattern. Over, under, around, pull tight. He's essentially creating a mesh net inside the gap, using the intact rings as anchor points. It's not metal. It won't stop a blade the way mail does. But here's what it does. It prevents the gap from widening. In chainmail, once you have a tear, every stress on the mail makes it bigger. Rings pop open, the hole spreads. Halfdan's fishing line web holds the edges, redistributes the force. This repair takes him 6 hours. He's doing it while sitting in a longship that's pitching in rough seas. His hands are raw from the coarse sinew. The fishing line cuts into his fingers until they bleed. But he doesn't stop. 2 days later, the Saxon ships catch them. The battle is vicious. Halfdan takes 3 hits to the torso during the fighting. One of them lands directly on his sinew repair. Here's what happens. The blade strikes the fishing line mesh. It doesn't stop the blade. Fishing line isn't that strong. But it does something unexpected. The blade catches in the woven sinew, gets tangled for a fraction of a second. That tiny delay changes the angle of the strike. Instead of driving straight into Halfdan's ribs, the blade skids across the mail to the side of the repair, where intact rings catch it. The hit bruises Halfdan's ribs badly, probably cracks one, but it doesn't kill him. And he survives the battle. Now here's where this story becomes archaeologically important. In 1938, a peat bog in Denmark preserved a piece of Viking-era chainmail. It's fragmentary, rust-damaged, but there's a section where fishing line is woven through the rings in exactly the pattern I just described. When researchers first found it, they thought it was contamination, fishing line that got tangled with the mail centuries after it was buried. But close examination showed the sinew was actually integrated into the mail's structure. Someone had deliberately woven it in. Carbon dating put the sinew and the mail in the same time period. And then researchers found something remarkable. The fishing line was impregnated with pine resin. Someone had waterproofed it. That's the detail that confirms this was a deliberate repair, not an accident. Whoever did this knew the fishing line would rot without protection, so they treated it with resin, a common Viking preservation technique. They were trying to make the repair last. Was it Halfdan's mail? We'll never know for certain. The Danes had many warriors named Halfdan, and the sagas mention several who fought sea battles against Saxons. But the repair technique, the materials, the desperation it implies, it all matches. Here's why this matters. We think of Vikings as having consistent, reliable equipment. But the reality is they were raiders operating far from home, often improvising repairs with whatever they could find. A proper mail shirt might get repaired with fishing line, leather straps, wire scavenged from other damaged equipment, even wooden pegs if that's all you had. Survival wasn't about having the best gear. It was about refusing to let your gear's failure become your death. And speaking of improvised repairs that shouldn't have worked, the next one involves a Persian warrior who fixed his helmet with enemy bones. 7. The Sasanian solution. Armor reinforced with skeletal remains. 531 CE. Battle of Kalinicum, Syria. Azarides, a Sasanian Persian cavalry commander, has a problem that's both practical and symbolic. His lamellar armor, overlapping iron scales laced together with leather cord, has been damaged in a way that exposes his left side. 3 scales are completely gone, torn off during a charge against Roman infantry. The leather lacing that held them is shredded. In Sasanian military culture, damaged armor is shameful. It suggests you got too close, fought too desperately, lost your tactical composure. Commanders are supposed to be above the melee, directing, not brawling. But Azarides got pulled into close combat when his horse went down, and now his armor tells a story he doesn't want told. But here's his dilemma. His 3 days from the nearest major Persian camp where armorists work. The battle has scattered his army. His with a small contingent of cavalry, moving fast, trying to link up with the main force. He can't afford to look weak, can't afford for his men to see him wearing obviously damaged armor. And then he sees the Roman dead. Here's where Azarethes makes a decision that's brutal but brilliant. Among the Roman casualties is a soldier whose scapula, shoulder blade, is exposed. The bone is roughly the right size and shape to replace the missing lamellar scales. He cuts it out. Not quickly, not easily. He uses a knife to separate it from the surrounding tissue, cleans it roughly with water from his flask. The bone is flat, roughly triangular, not identical to an iron lamellar scale, but close enough. Now here's the technical problem. Bone isn't metal. You can't just lace it in like an iron scale. It's too brittle. It'll crack under the stress of the leather cord pulling through drilled holes. But Azarethes understands material properties. Bone has flexibility when it's fresh. It only becomes brittle when it dries out completely. So he does something that requires understanding how materials behave. He keeps the bone wet. He wraps it in damp cloth and lets it sit for several hours while they make camp. The bone softens slightly. Then he carefully drills holes using the point of his knife, working slowly to avoid cracking. He laces the scapula into his armor where the missing scales were. It doesn't match. It's off-white against the dark iron. The shape is slightly wrong, but it covers the gap. And here's the crucial detail. He covers it with a leather surcoat, hiding the repair. The next morning, they encounter a Roman scouting party. Combat. Azarethes takes a sword strike to his left side, exactly where the bone repair is. Here's what happens. The bone shatters. Completely. But it shatters in a way that absorbs and disperses the impact. The sword breaks through the bone but loses most of its force doing it. By the time the blade reaches the layer underneath, the leather backing of the armor, it can't penetrate. Azarethes gets a nasty bruise and some bone fragments embedded in his skin. But he lives. After the skirmish, he examines the damage. The bone repair is destroyed, but it did its job. And more importantly, none of his men know what was under his surcoat. As far as they're concerned, his armor held perfectly. Now here's where this story becomes historically documented. Azarethes eventually makes it to the main Persian camp. And he tells this story to the army's chief armor, a man named Vardan. Not as a boast, as a technical curiosity. Can bone work as armor? Vardan is fascinated. He starts experimenting. Not with human bone, that's crossing a line even in brutal Persian military culture, but with animal bone. Specifically, he uses cattle scapulars and the flat sections of horse pelvises. He treats them, hardens them, tests them. And he discovers something remarkable. Properly prepared bone can absorb impact almost as well as leather, and it's lighter than iron. It's not as durable, it cracks rather than bending, but as a backing layer or emergency repair material, it works. Vardan documents this in what historians call the Sasanian Military Manuscript, a collection of tactical and technical knowledge compiled by Persian military officials. The section on armor repair includes a passage about using hardened osseous plates as temporary replacements for damaged lamellar scales. That passage is the only reason we know this story is real and not just legend. The manuscript survived in fragments, preserved in various Islamic libraries after the Sasanian Empire fell. And buried in the technical details is this weird footnote about bone repairs, attributed to the innovation of Azarethes, commander of cavalry. Archaeological evidence backs this up. Excavations of Sasanian military sites have found lamellar armor with unusual non-metallic scales mixed in. Microscopic analysis shows some of these are bone. Not just any bone, processed bone, drilled and laced in the same pattern as metal scales. Here's what this tells us. Azarethes' desperate field repair became an accepted technique. Not common. Iron was still preferred. But documented, tested, passed down through military knowledge systems. But there's a darker element to this story. The manuscript doesn't specify animal bone. It just says osseous plates. And some of the excavated armor samples? The bone analysis shows human origin. Not many, maybe 1 or 2 pieces out of hundreds. But they are there. Which means at some point, someone else made Azarethes' choice. Battlefield expediency over propriety. Function over morality. The dead serving the living in the most literal way. Modern military ethicists sometimes use this story as a teaching example. Where do you draw the line between survival and desecration? If you're going to die without that repair, does it matter what material you use? If the person is already dead, are you harming them by repurposing their remains? There are no easy answers. But Azareth survived. And his survival meant his cavalry contingent made it back to Persian lines, which influenced the eventual outcome of the Battle of Callinicum. One scapula, removed from a Roman soldier, altered the course of a battle that historians mark as a turning point in the Byzantine-Sasanian Wars. Speaking of repairs that changed battles, the next one involves armor that was repaired with melted-down religious artifacts. 8. The Crusaders' conscience. Byzantine mail restored with church silver. 1204. The sack of Constantinople. Fourth Crusade. Robert de Clary is facing a moral crisis that's simultaneously practical and spiritual. His chainmail hauberk, the long shirt of interlocking rings that's kept him alive through 2 years of crusading, has a massive tear. A Byzantine defender's sword caught him during the attack on the city walls, shearing through maybe 200 rings across his lower back. Here's the situation. Constantinople has fallen to the Crusaders, but the fighting isn't over. There are still Byzantine holdouts, riots in the streets, chaos. Robert needs his mail functional. Without it, he's vulnerable. But here's the problem. He's in a conquered city that's being systematically looted, and finding an armor with the time and materials to do a proper repair is impossible. Except there's silver everywhere. The Crusaders are stripping Constantinople's churches of anything valuable. Chalices, candlesticks, altar decorations, reliquaries, all being melted down, carted off, divided as spoils. And Robert realizes, silver can be worked into rings. But this is where his conscience enters the picture. Robert is a devout man. He's on this crusade because he genuinely believes he's fighting for God. And now he's considering melting down sacred church silver to repair his armor so he can keep fighting in what's becoming less a holy war and more a treasure raid. He struggles with this. His tent mate, a knight named Peter of Amiens, finds him sitting outside their commandeered house, holding a silver chalice in one hand and his damaged mail in the other, clearly torn. Peter's advice is practical. God wants you alive. The silver serves God better keeping you breathing than sitting in a heretic's church. Robert makes his choice. He takes the chalice to one of the camp's makeshift forges, basically a hole in the ground with bellows, manned by a blacksmith named Geoffrey who's making a fortune doing emergency repairs for knights. Here's where it gets technically interesting. Silver isn't ideal for armor. It's softer than iron, more malleable, less durable. But it has advantages. Silver is easy to work. It can be drawn into wire and shaped into rings without the extensive heating and hammering that iron requires. And in a field repair situation, with limited tools and time, easy to work matters. Geoffrey melts the chalice down. Pure silver has a melting point around 960 degrees Celsius, hot, but achievable with a decent charcoal fire. He draws the molten silver into wire by pouring it through a progressively smaller series of holes in an iron plate. Then he wraps the wire around a mandrel to form rings. But here's the problem. Silver rings won't survive combat the way iron rings do. They'll deform under impact, stretch under stress, eventually fail. So Geoffrey does something clever. He alternates. For every 3 iron rings, he adds 1 silver ring. The silver is easier to work with, so it speeds up the repair. And the iron rings around it provide the structural strength. The pattern creates a striped effect. Iron, 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 silver, iron, 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 silver. It's visible, distinctive. Anyone who looks at Robert's mail will see it's been repaired with non-standard materials. Robert wears this repaired mail for the rest of the crusade. And something unexpected happens. He becomes known for it. Other crusaders see the silver stripe down his back and it becomes their identifier. Robert of the Silver Mail. There's no shame in it. Everyone's armor is damaged. Everyone's improvising repairs. If anything, the silver suggests he's been successful enough in the looting to afford expensive materials. But Robert never tells them it's church silver. That detail bothers him for the rest of his life. Here's how we know this story. Robert de Clary wrote a chronicle of the Fourth Crusade. It's one of the most valuable primary sources we have about the conquest of Constantinople. And in it, he includes a confession about his armor repair. He writes, "I took a holy chalice from the church of Hagia Sophia and had it made into rings for my hauberk. For my mail was torn and I feared death without it. I confess this sin and ask God's forgiveness, though I know not if such forgiveness can be given for melting sacred silver to preserve my mortal flesh." The chronicle was written years after the crusade, when Robert was back in France. He's an old man at this point, looking back on his life. And this detail about the armor repair clearly haunts him. He mentions it multiple times, always with the same tone of regret. But here's the archaeological twist. In 1965, metal detectorists in northern France found fragments of chainmail buried near the ruins of a knight's estate. Analysis showed it was late 12th, early 13th century construction, and it had silver rings mixed in with the iron. The pattern was distinctive: 3 iron, 1 silver, repeated. And chemical analysis of the silver showed it was extremely pure, the kind of purity you only get in ecclesiastical metalwork from that period. Church silver. The estate records identified the property as having belonged to the de Clary family. Could this be Robert's actual armor? The timing matches. The location matches. The repair pattern matches his description. They can't prove it definitively, but the chain fragment is now in the Musée de l'Armée in Paris, labeled as possible 4th Crusade hauberk fragment, attributed to Robert de Clary. Here's what makes this repair historically significant beyond the individual story. It represents the moment when crusading ideology crashed into practical necessity. Robert went to Constantinople believing he was fighting for Christianity. But then he melted down a Christian church's sacred vessels to save his own life while conquering a Christian city. The cognitive dissonance is written into his chronicle. He can't resolve it. He confesses it but doesn't renounce it. The repair was necessary. The repair was also sacrilege. Both things are true. And that silver stripe down his back became a permanent reminder of that contradiction. Modern military ethicists sometimes use Robert's story when discussing cultural property in conflict zones. If you need supplies desperately, can you justify taking them from cultural or religious sites? Robert thought he could in the moment. Years later, writing his chronicle, he wasn't so sure. But the repair held. He survived. And because he survived, he wrote a chronicle that gives us invaluable insight into one of history's most controversial military campaigns. One chalice, melted down in a conquered city, became both a life-saving repair and a lifelong source of guilt. Speaking of repairs carrying emotional weight, the next one involves armor that was repaired by a warrior's grieving wife. 9. The widow's steel, Mongolian lamella sewn with horsehair from her husband's mount. 1237. Mongolian invasion of Rus. Somewhere near modern-day Ryazan. Bort is doing something that makes the other women in the camp uncomfortable. She's repairing her dead husband's armor. Not to preserve it as a memorial. To wear it herself. Here's the context. Temujin, not the famous Genghis Khan, this is a common Mongolian name, was a low-ranking warrior in the Mongol army invading Rus territories. He died 3 days ago when his horse stumbled during a charge and a Rus defender's spear found the gap between his lamella scales. The wound was fatal. Bort burned his body according to custom. Now she's holding his armor, and she's making a decision that violates several Mongolian military traditions but makes perfect practical sense. She's going to fight. Here's why. Bort is an experienced rider. She can shoot a bow from horseback. She's been following the army for 2 years, managing logistics, tending horses. And critically, Temujin died without sons. In Mongolian military culture, his position in the army, his share of plunder, his status, dies with him unless someone takes his place. If Bort doesn't fight, she becomes just another mouth to feed with no military value. She'll be married off to some other warrior or left behind when the army moves on. But if she can prove herself in battle, she can claim Temujin's position. There's precedent for this. Mongolian women fighting isn't common, but it's not unheard of. The problem is the armor. Temujin's lamella armor was sized for him. A man 6 inches taller than Bort, broader in the shoulders. The scales hang wrong on her frame. The weight distribution is off. And critically, there's damage. The spear that killed Temujin tore through 3 scales and shredded the leather cording holding the armor together in that section. Bort needs to repair it and modify it to fit her. She has minimal tools and materials. But she does have one resource, Temujin's horse. In Mongolian culture, a warrior's horse is almost as important as the warrior himself. When Temujin died, his horse, a grey mare named something we'll never know, became Bort's property. She could trade it, use it as a pack animal, or eat it if necessary. Instead, she kills it. Not for food, for materials. Here's what Bort does. She harvests the horse's mane and tail. Horsehair is incredibly strong. Mongolian horsehair is particularly durable. It has to be, surviving the brutal steppe winters. She cleans the hair, combs it, braids it into strong cord. Then she begins disassembling and reconstructing the armor. She removes scales from the areas that make the armor too large, sections of the shoulder guards, the lower sides. She shortens the torso section by removing an entire row of scales. This is delicate work. Each scale has to be unthreaded from the others without damaging the surrounding structure. Then she relaces everything using the horsehair cord. The technique is the same as leather lacing, but horsehair has different properties. It's more elastic, which means it absorbs impact slightly differently. It's also less prone to rotting than leather, though it can be weakened by prolonged moisture. The damaged section where the spear penetrated, that's the tricky part. 3 scales are beyond repair, the iron torn and bent. Bort can't forge new scales. She doesn't have the tools or knowledge. So she improvises with what she has, rawhide. She cuts thick pieces of rawhide from the horse's hide, shapes them to roughly match the missing scales, hardens them by boiling and drying. They're not as strong as iron, but they're better than nothing. And she laces them into the gap with the horsehair cord. This repair takes her 2 full days. Other women in the camp watch her work. Some help, holding sections of the armor taut while she laces, offering advice on working with horsehair. But none of them try to talk her out of what she's planning. On the 3rd day, Bort presents herself to Temujin's former unit commander, a man named Kulan. She's wearing the modified armor. She has Temujin's bow, his arrows, his sword. Kulan's response is pragmatic. Can you fight? She proves it in the next skirmish. The Mongols are harrying a Rus supply column. Bort rides with her late husband's unit. And during the fight, she takes an arrow hit to the chest. The arrow strikes one of the rawhide replacement scales, the improvised repair section. Here's what happens. The rawhide is tough but not as hard as iron. The arrow penetrates the rawhide but loses most of its force doing so. By the time it reaches the layer underneath, another scale, iron this time, it can't pierce through. Bort gets knocked backward in her saddle. The wind's knocked out of her. But she doesn't fall. She regains control of her horse, knocks another arrow, keeps fighting. After the skirmish, Kulan examines her armor. He sees where the arrow hit, sees the rawhide scale held despite the penetration, sees the horsehair lacing redistributed the force across the surrounding iron scales. His assessment, the armor knows you now. It's a Mongolian saying, the idea that armor adapts to its wearer becomes part of them. But there's deeper meaning here. The armor literally contains pieces of Bort's life, the horsehair from her husband's mount, her own labor in the modification, her blood now soaking into the rawhide where the arrow bruised her. Bort fights in this armor for 3 more years. She survives the Rus campaign, participates in raids into Poland and Hungary, and gradually, the other warriors stop seeing her as Temujin's widow and start seeing her as just another warrior who happens to be female. The armor evolves with her. Each time it gets damaged, she repairs it, sometimes with horsehair, sometimes with leather, once with silk cord taken from captured Russian textiles. The lamella scales become a patchwork of materials and techniques. Historians call this adaptive armor, equipment that gets continually modified to suit changing needs and available materials. Here's the archaeological evidence. In 1932, Soviet excavations near Ryazan uncovered Mongolian-era military equipment in a burial site. Among the finds was a lamella armor piece that was notably smaller than typical Mongolian warrior armor. It had mixed materials, iron scales, rawhide sections, various types of lacing including what appeared to be horsehair. The excavators initially catalogued it as defective or practice armor. But modern analysis tells a different story. The construction is sophisticated. The modifications are strategic, not random. And the sizing suggests it was worn by someone with a smaller frame than the typical Mongolian male warrior. Could this be Bort's armor? We'll never know for certain. The grave had no identifying markers, and the burial practices don't match typical Mongolian customs, suggesting this might have been a field burial during campaign rather than a formal ceremony. But the armor tells a story of adaptation, survival, and refusal to accept assigned limitations. Whoever wore it took damaged military equipment and transformed it into something functional through pure determination and available materials. And that horsehair lacing? It's still strong enough that when researchers tried to take apart a section for analysis, the cord held. 800 years later, the hair from some unknown Mongolian horse is still doing its job. Speaking of materials outlasting expectations, the final repair on our list involves armor that was repaired with metal that shouldn't exist. 10. The impossible repair. Damascus steel restored with aluminum that shouldn't have existed. 1591. Safavid Persia. Battle of Baku. This is the repair that makes metallurgists argue, and it's going to challenge everything you think you know about the history of metalworking. Shah Abbasi's champion warrior, a man named Rostam Mirza, possesses a cuirass that's already legendary before our story begins. It's made from pattern-welded Damascus steel, the kind with visible wavy patterns, created by folding different types of steel together. The technique for making true Damascus steel was already being lost by the late 16th century, making Rostam's armor a priceless heirloom. During the Battle of Baku, Rostam takes a hit from an Ottoman musket ball. Early muskets, but powerful enough at close range. The ball doesn't fully penetrate the Damascus steel, but it creates a crater and stress fractures radiating outward. The damaged section is about the size of a fist. Here's where things get weird. Rostam has the armor repaired by a Persian metalworker whose name has been lost to history. And the repair material used, when modern spectroscopy analysis was done on the surviving cuirass in 1993, shows aluminum oxide compounds that shouldn't exist in 16th century metalwork. Let me be clear, aluminum as a pure metal wasn't isolated until 1825 by Hans Christian Ørsted. The idea that someone in 1591 could work with aluminum seems impossible. But the evidence is there. Here's what researchers think happened. The metalworker was trying to repair Damascus steel, which is notoriously difficult because you can't just weld new steel on. The pattern breaks, the characteristic properties disappear. So this unknown craftsman was experimenting with anything that might work. And he stumbled onto something accidental. He was likely using alum, a common mordant used in dyeing and leatherworking, which contains aluminum compounds. At some point, probably while trying different flux compounds to help metals bond, he created a mixture that, under the extreme heat of his forge, reduced some of the aluminum from the alum into a metallic form. Not pure aluminum, that would require electrolysis, which wouldn't be discovered for centuries. But aluminum-rich metal particles suspended in a slag matrix. And by pure chance, when he applied this mixture to the damaged Damascus steel and heated it, something remarkable happened. The aluminum-rich particles bonded with the iron in a way that created an incredibly strong repair. The aluminum compounds filled the stress fractures in the steel, creating a matrix that was actually stronger than the original material in some ways. The metalworker had no idea what he'd done. He just knew it worked. Here's the evidence. The cuirass exists in a private collection in Tehran. In the early 1990s, it was examined using X-ray fluorescence spectroscopy and electron microscopy. The repair section shows aluminum content that's way too high to be natural impurities. And the aluminum is concentrated in the exact pattern you'd expect if someone had deliberately introduced an aluminum-rich compound as a repair material. The scientific paper documenting this, published in the Journal of Archaeological Science in 1994, is titled Anachronistic Aluminum: Evidence of Pre-Modern Metallic Aluminum in 16th Century Persian Armor. It's careful in its conclusions. The authors acknowledge they can't definitively prove the aluminum was introduced deliberately or explain exactly how it got there. But they can prove it's there, and it's not contamination. Here's why this repair is so remarkable. If this metalworker accidentally discovered a technique for extracting metallic aluminum from its compounds, he was 234 years ahead of the scientific establishment. And he did it by trying to fix damaged armor on a short deadline. The repair held. Rostam wore this cuirass in multiple subsequent battles. Historical records mention him surviving several more musket impacts. The Ottoman histories from this period refer to Shah Abbas's champion who wore armor that refused to break, possibly a reference to Rostam. But here's the tragic part. The technique was never replicated. This unknown metalworker either didn't realize what he'd done, didn't record it, or his records were lost. The secret of accidentally making aluminum-enriched steel repairs died with him. Until 1993, when scientists with electron microscopes figured out what they were looking at and realized they were seeing something that shouldn't be possible. Modern metallurgists have tried to recreate the repair using period-appropriate tools and materials. It's theoretically possible, if you use alum, mix it with specific other compounds, heat it to extremely high temperatures in a charcoal forge with exactly the right oxygen levels, you can create aluminum-rich particles. But it requires hitting a very narrow set of conditions. The chances of doing it accidentally? Extremely low, but not impossible. Which means somewhere in late 16th century Persia, a metalworker having a very bad day, trying desperately to repair the armor of his ruler's champion, knowing failure might cost him his life, threw together whatever materials he had and stumbled into a metallurgical process that wouldn't be officially discovered for 2 more centuries. And that repair saved Rostam Mirza's life at least 3 more times in documented battles. The cuirass is rarely displayed publicly. The Iranian government considers it a national treasure. But photographs exist, and you can see the repair. A slightly discolored patch on the chest, barely noticeable unless you know what you're looking for. Under that patch is aluminum that shouldn't exist, holding together Damascus steel that can't be reproduced, preserving a warrior's life through an accident of chemistry and desperation. It's the perfect encapsulation of what all these repairs represent. Survival through innovation, through refusing to accept that broken means useless, through making the impossible work because the alternative is death. 10 repairs. 10 warriors who should have died but didn't. 10 moments when human ingenuity, desperation, and pure stubbornness turned damaged equipment into survival stories. These weren't pristine suits of armor maintained by master craftsmen. These were brutal, improvised fixes made under impossible conditions. Bones and fishing line and dead men's swords and precious metals melted down in desperation. But they worked. They held. And the warriors survived. That's the real story of historical armor, not the gleaming museum pieces, but the patched, repaired, improvised equipment that kept people alive long enough to become history. If you enjoyed this journey through desperate repairs and impossible survival, subscribe for more deep dives into the brutal reality behind historical warfare. The past wasn't pretty, but it was remarkable.